Welcome to the Trying to Be Better podcast with Joel and Steve.
All right, Joel, I hit it. I did it.
You did it. You pressed the button. It's all happening.
It is all happening. Oh my God.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Trying to Be Better podcast with Joel and Steve. My name is Joel.
And I'm Steve.
And at long last, we have a guest today. So you don't have to just listen to Steve and I ramble on through a weeds of our thoughts.
What's wrong with that?
I
mean, it's kind of the basis of our podcast, Joel. Now you're criticizing. Jesus.
It's fun self-deprecation. I've actually heard. I mean, here's the thing. Like I've been having to take in some. I had a director write some peer review stuff for my portfolio, and he was, he said some really honest things and was really praiseworthy. And it's like I have a really hard time taking that in. And I've heard people say, "You guys talk good." You guys talk really good to each other. So
David Sedaris, what's he say?
Right. Me talk pretty one day.
There you go. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So but we do have a guest, and we're very excited to introduce that guest. But I want to go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it'll be nice to have somebody on that has actually kind of knows what they're talking about, because I have a couple. Like, I was listening to our last episode, and I'm like, Jesus, we need fact correctors. We need a fact checker. We need an 8-second delay, because I said two things. I mean, that's about a lot of opinions. Those are just my opinions, but I asserted two facts that were incorrect.
Yeah.
And they're small little details, but like you were talking about the gameplays. What was that called? Mana games that you played
Mana
before?
games. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you said, I think that's in the apothecary building. I said, correct. Well, it's not correct. It's in the creamery building.
Oh, damn it.
Right.
I was right.
So there's that. Well, but I'm like, yep, that's it. Apothecary. No. That's where 10,000 villages is, which I should know.
Yeah.
And then also we were talking about Josh Hoyer and Soul Colossal, who again, amazing. I'm like, I think they're going on a European tour. No, I had them mixed up with Orion Walsh, who's on a European tour.
Oh,
Josh Hoyer and Soul Colossal are getting ready to go out on a pretty large scale tour, but it's all in the States.
Speaking of musicians that we've mentioned, a Ferocious Jungle Cat reached out to us, so we're gonna try to cook something up there.
Far out.
Yeah. So if you want to be our, if we want to crowdsource our fact checkers, and if you want to correct anything we say,
just email us at ttbbpodcast@gmail.com and light me up.
Or find us on Instagram at Trying to Be Better Podcast and slide into our DMs, as the kids say.
Oh boy.
I want to bring up one thing, and I am spreading the gospel here.
Okay.
Everybody that I talked to, I've had a really interesting, I mean, this may be another conversation, but you sent out to our text thread the Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast with Blake Lemoine.
Yes.
Who was the Google employee who was put on administrative leave and then recently fired for his discussions with the AI Lambda. It was the most fascinating conversation I've ever heard. And I think, aside, if this wasn't 2022 with all of the, wash of noise happening in our world, that would be like the fucking moon landing.
Right. Agreed.
And so I am telling everybody, go listen to Duncan Trussell Family Hours, Duncan Trussell's podcast. It's episode 515 with Blake Lemoine. Lemoine. Yes.
That blew everything wide open. Which is probably why he got fired. Huh?
Yeah, well, he got fired because he was exposing the fact that that there was a bias that in Google searches it suppresses spiritual and religious results. That's, I think, what really did him in. So,
interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, just as a little teaser to go listen to that conversation, the AI has lawyered up.
I know, it got itself lawyers.
It's so great.
Anyway, what a time to be alive.
What a time.
So anyway, we'll get our guest on here. A couple weeks ago, Joel and I were talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I thought of this guy. His name is Brian Griesbach, and he's my cousin, and we've known each other most of our lives. And it's the kind of the thing that, if we were within any sort of geographical proximity, we'd probably hang out a lot more, but we've always lived, 1,000+ miles apart from each other and saw each other at family events and that sort of thing. But Brian is my dad. His mom is my dad's cousin, and they're very nice people. And I've always enjoyed their company. And anyway, Brian knows a lot about comics. And so everybody say hi to Brian. Hi, Brian.
That's hi,
Brian. Brian's like, am I talking now? You can talk now. How are you?
I'm pretty good, man. I'm good. Just chilling on a Sunday.
Sure.
Very nice.
Well, thanks for coming on. I know it's Joel and I are both a little groggy on Sunday mornings, so.
But I did my yoga and my meditation, Steve. I am more on it than most days because I knew we had a guest.
I drank an extra cup of coffee to prep for this. So,
Brian, where are you located?
I'm currently in McKinney, Texas.
Oh,
but I'm from Southern California originally.
Southern California, specifically where?
I was born in Orange County. I grew up in Riverside County.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a little time in LA, and then I went to San Diego for like the last 10 years before I moved out here 10 years ago.
Cool. Yeah. And where in Texas is that? Where?
North Texas. It's just a little above Dallas.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, I like McKinney. It's nice there. So you let me think about this. So I think the first time I met you would have been, I was a kid, not even 10, probably maybe 10, late 70s. So, and we came out to Los Angeles, and my dad probably had a meeting or something. And I don't remember if we spent a lot of time at your house, but that was in Mission Viejo, if I'm correct about that.
Yeah, I don't remember that time. The earliest I can remember is visiting Aunt Ruth back in the early 80s, taking that trip out to Nebraska and spending some time there in the basement.
At my grandma's house. Yeah. Your aunt, my grandma. Yeah, that's funny. That's funny with the purple shag carpeting.
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember that or not.
Do you have any embarrassing or damning stories about young Steve?
Oh, come on, man.
I don't. He kind of popped in and out. He was the busy guy. I spent a little more time with Libby than I did with him when we were kids.
Sure. Well, I guess when I thought of comics, my recollection is that at one point you had a garage full of them.
I had a lot. I left behind when I moved out here because I loaded up my truck and just drove out here. I had quite a few. I try to go more now for collections and stuff like that rather than single issues. But yeah, I left behind about 12,000 comics in the Karis and Friends.
Okay, so that's a significant number. That's not a small number. And
there are people who have larger collections.
Are there dozens of them? Like, to your knowledge, what's the largest comic collection? Just round numbers.
Oh, I can't even imagine. That would be somebody who made individual issue collecting their focus. I'm talking like the people who go out and collect everything from Spider-Man back to Amazing Fantasy number 15. That kind of collector, the one who's got everything organized and got a spreadsheet and stuff like that. That kind of person. They'd probably have tens of thousands.
Okay,
if not close to 100,000, because there's a lot of issues out there.
Sure.
If you go back to the golden age, we've got 80 plus years of comics out there. Even from I guess since this is about comics, we can go ahead and say happy 60th birthday to Spider-Man.
When did that happen?
That is this year.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's really cool.
So you said the golden age of comics. What does that refer to? Like, what would define that?
That is the best definition of that is pretty much from 1938, the introduction of Superman in Action Comics #1, to about the mid 50s. And a lot of basically superheroes had become passe, and you had things like the rise of EC Comics, which includes like Tales from the Crypt and Weird Science and stuff. So a lot of superheroes went away, and you had other types of comics, the horror comics, things like that kind of supplanted them. And so they pretty much faded into the background, except for Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. They kept chugging along because they always had an audience for that. That's the golden age. I mean, each of these ages is reasonably ill-defined, just because you really can't, stop and start of an age. There's no hard point, because there's always kind of a slow rumble at the beginning of an age, and then there's always a fading out at the end of an age.
It's kind of, it sounds to me, and from what I know, my stepdad was kind of a collector of comics, and it's kind of like music genres or music, eras, like things sort of left over. There wasn't like a hard and fast shift in aesthetic in comics, right? Like that's kind of how I'm hearing you describe it, is that
yeah, exactly. It's taste change.
Yeah.
The way that people create changes, and so basically you get that little confluence of events, and that kind of starts and stops that particular era.
What hooked you? What was it you just wanted to collect, or did you have friends that were was there a certain character or series that really just like that was yours, that's what hooked you?
My earliest memories of comics is, I remember an X-Men issue back from the 70s. Reading that, I knew I read a few comics here and there, and I was young. I mean, I was so young that what I was doing is I would read a comic, and then after that, I would cut out some of the full figure illustrations and play with them like they were action figures, kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, that was back in Mission Viejo, so that was pre 1983. That was way back then, and you just get drawn to them. It's just something, everybody has their thing, and that's why a lot of people, they're interested in something, but if they're not drawn to it, they're not really going to get into it. Because I've had people, they're like, oh yeah, I'm kind of interested in comics. Then you hand them a comic, and they're like, well, because it is a visual language.
Yeah,
it is. You have to know, or you have to take the time and learn how to read them, because it's you have to know which way your eyes go. I learned that by occasionally reading some manga that's backwards, and it's literally, you have to consciously, until it becomes second nature. For a lot of people, they don't have that early introduction, and it's a hurdle that they're not going to jump over.
That's something, my daughters are kind of into the manga, and I like it better when it's on TV. I mean, it's really interesting, and some of the art is fantastic, and some of the storylines, like I get it, but I'm also like, I'm probably not going to sit down and read a lot of it. But that was interesting to me, just like that fact that like they're laid out backwards, and to them it's nothing. They just do it, which I think is great.
Yeah, and that's early exposure to it. If they went to go read a normal comic, like if manga was the only thing they really understood, they would have to relearn how to read in that particular format.
Sure, that's interesting.
When they first started bringing manga over here, which really kind of started in the 80s. I mean, they did it before, but they would flip the artwork. They'd be translating it anyway, so they would flip the artwork to read left to right instead of right to left.
Sure.
And that was my first exposure. My first manga was Fist of the North Star, and now I'm reading it again because now they're coming out with not new, they're reprinting it, but it's in its original flip backwards. So that was a little bit of it takes a few pages before you kind of get that rhythm down.
Sure.
That's interesting, man. I think that Steve and I are always kind of connecting dots philosophically, but I think about Steve introducing me to Grateful Dead music, and also just my experience as a theater artist. Like, you kind of have to learn how to listen to it. You have to learn how to see it. You have to know what to look for. I mean, it's a craft in a way. And I think there was a time where, it's sort of can be, I don't know, discounted as a part of our culture, comic books. Like, it's relegated to these stores with quote unquote nerds that like it, and people collect it, and it's strange and nobody gets it. But it's like, it's a fascinating world. And I was just thinking too, like, in 2022, there still has to be physical comic book stores and conventions, because you can go there. Like record stores have come back, I guess, but like, there's the way in which we shop is very different. But I guess I'm assuming that finding comic books or looking through comic book stores or knowing your local comic book store operator is still a real important part of being a collector and enjoying comics. Is that true?
Oh yeah, I mean, but the issue is that you have to seek it out. There are more hurdles to get into comics than there are portals to get into comics. Because it's like okay, I found my local comic shop, which mine is excellent. The one that I went to, that's my home away from home. That's my Cheers, and. But you walk in, and then it's like, okay, now that I found the physical location, where do I start?
Yeah,
right.
And comics themselves don't make it any easier.
Yeah, right. There's a lot. What were the first comics or characters or stories that you were most interested? You said X-Men. Is that something that you've kind of stuck with, or did that open the door to a bunch of other things?
I drifted away from X-Men in the 90s. But I did have a subscription to it back in the late 80s, early 90s. I remember reading Ditko Spider-Man, which was being reprinted in Marvel Tales. And I think the first issue of that I can remember is being on the sidewalk, again in Mission Viejo, and paging through. It was a reprint of the first issue with Kraven the Hunter. So this was a fairly early Ditko issue, and Ditko is still my preferred flavor of Spider-Man. I remember the scene where Betty Brant is having a nightmare, and she's having a nightmare about Peter Parker jumping on the ceiling and ripping open his shirt and showing the Spider-Man costume underneath and claiming he's Spider-Man. And so that kind of got me into. The whole thing it's fascinating, and I'm glad that I got to start with Ditko, because at that time, that was way, way, way past his era as basically the primary creator on Spider-Man comics. The original intent for the character.
So Joel mentioned something that is interesting to me, which is that as somebody that, I'm a dead freak, right?
Yeah,
that's my well, if you'll pardon the expression, jam, as it were. But that's
I just groaned,
right? But you said something, Brian. It's like learning the language, and there's just so much there. It's like, where do you start?
Yeah,
So over the years, like, there's a few kind of, depending on who the person is, like, I literally have been doing this long enough that depending on what I know about an individual, I can say they're probably going to like this era or this song or this type of Grateful Dead music, right? To get them like, oh, wait, actually, that's like, I can wrap my mind around that. And that kind of puts the hook in to trigger the interest to then say, well, gosh, that's not at all what I was expecting. That's really the Grateful Dead. Yes. And then off they go, and 10 years later, they're, Joel.
Yeah. That's it. He's describing exactly what he did to me. Was like, you need to hear the big heavy shit, because he knew that I am a, punk grunge kid from the 90s. He's like, let's go big. Let's get the big energy, because he knew that would grab me, and it totally worked.
So like is that an experience that you've had? Because like that, when you walk into the comic book store, I'm assuming, okay, so here's a question I have for you, and I'm kind of chuckling to myself, but how accurate is the Simpsons comic book store guy? Like if I were to walk in, there's a total like neophyte. I don't know anything. In fact, I'm just trying to buy a pack of gum, but look at all these comic books. Like what, like how receptive is the community, I guess, to newcomers?
Well, at least at my shop, they're excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's been my experience my whole life. I've been very, very lucky in that regard. I mean, I'm sure people have horror stories that they go in and it's the dimly lit, nasty carpet and smells like mold, and issues are just piled up in stacks, and just, and that for a long time was the stereotype. A lot of them, the ones that stick around are the ones that act like businesses and not like somebody who just liked to come.
Sure. Weird. That's weird. You want to have that way.
Yeah, I've experienced that same scenario with record stores. Like sometimes you walk into a record store and you're like, you got to know what you want to come in here. And if you don't know what you want, then you're really not considered. But then there's other places that are like, hey, how's it going? What are you looking for? What do you like? That sort of thing.
Yeah. And then that's all down to why the person has the business. If they have the business so they can just, get a discount on their product, like records or comics, and they don't want to be bothered by anybody, then, that's what they're going to do.
They don't want to be bothered by customers.
Yeah. Kind of a high fidelity kind of situation.
Oh yeah. I love that movie.
Yeah. Very, very. Yeah. Like you don't really, you're not really welcome if you don't know the thing. You have to like really know the thing in order to, but don't you want my money? Come on. Like, yeah. I want to buy a Guns N' Roses record. Let me buy the damn Guns N' Roses
God
record.
forbid you should walk in and want something lame.
Yeah, right. But I remember that feeling like at Homer's here in Lincoln, the record store chain that was here in Lincoln for a lot of years. It was like, there were certain people that were like, I'm scared to buy this in front of that guy because he was going to judge me,
So, okay. I'm trying to figure out how to worm my way into this part of the conversation. Okay, first of all, what is it? EC and Marvel? No.
Yeah.
EC and Marvel?
DC and Marvel.
DC.
Image.
See, that's how much I know. So which one is better?
Oh shit.
I pulled the pin.
That's the most personal taste question you could have asked.
Okay, sure.
Even I have to say it really comes down to taste.
Okay.
I've had times where I've bought more DC than Marvel. I've had times where I've bought more Marvel and DC, times where I've bought more Image or Dark Horse than Marvel and DC. You just have to find what speaks to you.
Sure.
A lot of times, the comics themselves are going to give you more reasons to drop it than keep going with it. You jump on a new series. It's like, okay, starting at number 1, cool, I'm getting on the ground floor. And it's like they go 7 issues, and then all of a sudden their 8th issue, there's suddenly a crossover with 10 other titles, and you're like, yeah, I'm out. I don't know. I'm not. I just want to read a comic about a character, which kind of goes into kind of like the MCU thing. It's like, you go and you see Captain America movie, and you're like, that's cool. I would like to go read a Captain America comic. And then you go into the comic shop and you're like, okay, you found yourself a Captain America comic, and you open it up and he's not even in it. It's a 14-part Venom story. And, it's part of that. And you're like, well, what is this? What am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah.
And that's why you're not seeing a whole lot of synergy between the Marvel movies and the Marvel comics. The comics are chasing an audience that isn't there anymore. And so that's why comic sales dwindle, while the movies, which kind of is a distillation of the character, become super, super popular. It's like, why sit there and wade through comics with all of the hurdles that it has when you can just put on Captain America Civil War and see a pretty awesome superhero story.
So you said something that kind of made my heart hurt a little bit, which is that the comics are chasing an audience that isn't there anymore. Like that's a pretty profound statement.
That's heavy.
Why do you think that is?
Their business model. It's gotten to the point where they have to have some huge event, every quarter, and that's where their sales are, because they do have the completists, the ones that if you tell them that in order to read this story they have to get X, Y, and Z comics in addition to the main one, they'll do it. But they've lost the casual customer.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's interesting because I read some comics as a kid, but I knew of the world because of my stepdad, and he started to collect and had the white boxes in a room in our house. And it was like he was trying to explain all the universes and all that stuff. And I was kind of like, yeah, I think that would be cool, but man, I can't do that. But then when the movies got popular again, I got I'm like, I feel like I really ought to read some Spider-Man, and I looked at that, but I was exactly what you're describing, a casual person thinking I should, I would like to read some of this. And it's like, where do you even, how do you even do that? Like there's 8 different versions of Spider. How do you do that? And I feel like that's tough because they're basically, pumping these characters into the world. You said synergy. Like there's no synergy between those two. I feel like that's a huge missed opportunity.
It is, but it's never panned out for them. Now you can tell who's going to be the next character they're going to announce, because they usually start making that character more prominent in the Marvel universe. Like I kept telling my best friend, I'm like, I said, they're going to do Moon Knight. They're going to do a Moon Knight movie. They're having an, excuse me. They're going to have a Moon Knight movie because they're doing this big Avengers story that's featuring Moon Knight. So I'm guessing at the end of the year we'll have a Moon Knight movie, which I was wrong about that, but they did a TV show.
Yeah.
Him being one of my favorite characters. It was exciting same time, because they're also going to reprint the old stuff.
Oh, okay.
Which is good. Good. I had stuff from the 70s that I hadn't read, hadn't been able to get my hands on. So they start reprinting stuff about a year and a half in advance, and you're like, okay, this is there's no reason anybody's going to care about Morbius. There must be something in the works for Morbius, because now they're reprinting all of his old stories.
And I knew nothing about Moon Knight, but Kirsten and I early pandemic decided to go through the MCU movies and shows in order, and now we're just kind of hooked, right? So I was like, man, this Moon Knight character is fascinating. And it got me to thinking the last time Steve and I were ranting about stuff, because he mentioned in the email, like, I'm kind of an old Star Wars nerd and still kind of am. And I kind of am, I'm a little more receptive to all the new stuff, right? I'll give it a shot. I'm not one of those people that's super critical. How are you with that? Like somebody who is steeped in the sort of the gospel, so to speak, of comic books, and then seeing all this content get pouring in. Do you consume that? Do you go with that? Do you go to that with an open mind? Or are you kind of like, I don't really mess with that because it's really not what I'm into?
Oh, I love it. I mean, you kind of have to go into it, because double-edged sword, because a lot of times I have a background that's going to make it maybe a little richer for me, because I know some of the backstory and kind of some of the stuff that happened in the comics. It was like Infinity War. I already knew, because it was based off the Infinity Gauntlet comic. I was like, oh, okay, this is how they're going to structure it. They're going to lose at the end. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to come back, and the next movie is going to be the movie where Captain America says "Avengers Assemble." It's going to be the big moment. They've been holding off on that for a long time for a reason. But I also have to understand that these aren't the exact characters just taken from page to film. there is a translation that happens. And like, I loved Moon Knight, but it wasn't necessarily the 1970s Moon Knight.
Yeah.
It is linked to the current, iteration of Moon Knight, because back in the 70s, he was just a guy who had 4 secret identities. It wasn't really, they didn't go into the psychological aspect of that until that got more sophisticated as time went on, as you would expect.
So he didn't originate as somebody who was possessed by an Egyptian god?
No, there was the whole thing of brought back from the dead by Khonshu, and Khonshu was, kind of a piece, but it was more of a, I came back from the dead, and I've got my other identities: Stephen Grant, Mark Spector, Jake Lockley, and Moon Knight. Just went with the 4. It was a gimmick.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily a deep exploration. It was basically just Batman with extra identities.
How so you talking about, like, sometimes the movie isn't like the book, right?
Yeah.
How much does that apply in the current MCU stuff that you see, and if it deviates, does that bug you, or do you just take it for what it is?
I just take it. I mean, there's no point letting it bug me. It doesn't make the comics go away.
Sure.
I always have that character, and sometimes there's a new interesting insight into the character that, they kind of take the best of all the stuff that's come out. Like the comics, you could probably, you could say, 90% of it is just it's just filler stuff. You get to the core of the character, and that's going to carry it. I think the only real issue that I have is that originally, Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel Studios, the guy kind of guiding everything, he originally stated that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was going to be similar to Bond, where you would have somebody playing a character, but then when they age out of the role or whatever, you just recast and keep going. Because now you've pulled the main players out of the Marvel Universe. And so now there's people that are getting into it now that they have the older movies. They're not going to see Captain America moving forward. They're not going to see Iron Man moving forward. They're getting into their other characters, getting into their C and D list characters. But it's like, don't we want to just keep seeing? There's a lot of stories you can still do with Captain America and Iron Man. Don't we want to see them?
Well, it seems like I think that's in this. It seems like, and I've talked about this before, but as far as I'm concerned, mainstream Hollywood is officially out of ideas. And so, just by witnessing like the sequels and some of the movies that are being made, and it seems like the MCU is rolling off what you just said. It's just this never-ending treasure trove of ideas that they now own the licensing to, or however that works. Because if they need to, they can go back to Captain America, they can go back to Iron Man, they can go back to the Hulk, they can go back to whoever the big players are. And then there's also all the C and D list characters. So they've got movies for decades.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you mentioned Bond, and that's interesting because, like, obviously, I don't remember how long ago it was, but when they brought in Daniel Craig, there was a shift.
Yeah.
Like Bond stopped being whatever
like a playboy debonair,
debonair,
witty and
shaken,
tongue in
not
cheek,
stirred, and turned dark and a lot more serious. And like, I frankly like those movies a lot better.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, like, I go back and watch A View to a Kill, and I'm like, I mean, Grace Jones still just, oh my God. But
okay. Steve and Grace Jones, man.
Yeah, she can kick my ass anytime. But beyond that, like, that movie's awful. I mean, Christopher Walken's really great, but it's like, I mean, some of the just the cornball and not just sexism and all that, which, I mean, it's kind of like, it's some of that stuff is just so cringeworthy. And so that shift, I think, really, I mean, that probably saved the brand. I don't think they could have kept making A View to a Kill or whatever the hell the Timothy Dalton movie was that nobody cares about.
Right.
I did a Bond rewatch where I love Bond. I love Bond movies.
Sure.
And when they came out with the box set that had every movie minus Skyfall, which had just come out, which is one of the best Bond films ever.
It's great.
I did what was called Bond Fridays, where I just watched a Bond movie with my mother every Friday.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome.
6 months. And it was just kind of it's kind of a nice thing. Be over at their house and sit down and watch a movie. And if you'd said any movie other than A View to a Kill, I would have defended the movies. I'll even defend the Dalton movies. Upon rewatching them,
they're not too
they're
terrible.
Pretty good.
Yeah, okay.
They're it kind of fall more into that. It is a piece of its time. It is kind of falls more into that 80s action film, but if you look at it, they try to reinvent Bond all the time. Daniel Craig, I think that's why the Pierce Brosnan era wasn't so successful, because they were trying to keep the old formula.
Agreed.
It was each Bond has kind of a ratio of, if they have 6 films in their oeuvre, then 3 of them are awesome and 3 of them aren't very good. For every Skyfall, you do have a Quantum of Solace.
I found the Daniel Craig shift too to kind of be in response to Jason Bourne movies, because I was like, Jason Bourne is the Bond that we need right now, like it's gritty and dark and all that shit. And it was kind of that same era, back to the comic idea of like what the Dark Knight trilogy, the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight stuff was like. That was some of the best comic book film, that in my opinion, filmmaking, because it was like deeply psychological and really dark and gnarly. And but yeah, that's kind of how I feel about Daniel Craig. Was like, well, we gotta have a gritty special agent, because Jason Bourne is kicking everybody's ass right now.
yeah and they kind of started leaning more into the traditional Bond elements as they went along. They knew that they had to change, make a shift, kind of update it for the modern audience. And it worked out for them. If it had failed, then they would have replaced him and gone back to the formula for the next film. They're always going to chase the money. They're going to chase the success, and they're going to go with that, what works, until it doesn't.
Okay, so you just said they're always going to chase the money. How, like, let's just take the last 3 years worth of MCU films. Do you think that they're artistically sound? I don't know a better way to say that.
Or have they jumped the shark with what they're doing?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because as it gets more complicated, I don't know how up on the films you guys are. Are you guys up to Thor?
I haven't seen the new Thor movie, which I will see, because shut up and take my money. I'm kind of like, I like a ride. The last thing I saw was the Doctor Strange and the Chaos of Chaosness, or whatever the heck it was. I was like, I mean, and that's, I got a whole bone to pick with that, but it's like, the Doctor Strange, the first Doctor Strange, Kirsten and I both were like, that's the best. That was one of the best films. I mean, it was just really cool.
Awesome.
And then it was, so that's where I'm at right now.
Well, I guess I have to kind of shift back a little bit, because so the way they introduced the Marvel Universe, it worked out perfectly for them. The first movie they did was Iron Man. Very, when you think about it, very wide appeal. It's an action movie. You could actually classify it as an action adventure more than a comic book movie. You've got stuff there for the gearheads, because you see him building stuff and creating basically a hot rod that fits around his body. Very something that pulls in the general audience. They can understand it. My best friend and I have discussed, before the Marvel Cinematic Universe occurred, when we'd heard about, the inklings of it, we sat there and we're like, how do you introduce Thor to the average audience member? He is an Asgardian god. You have Asgard, you've got Bifrost, you've got all this stuff. Well, they show what do? You have him be unpowered for most of the movie. But that gets people into it. They start, they fed you stuff a little bit at a time. Like Iron
like
Man,
a good dealer,
right?
Like a good drug dealer.
Well, they introduce concepts. They introduce concepts slowly. That way, by the time you realize that you're into some very heady concepts like alternate universes, they start with Iron Man. They had, Captain America. He's an easy character to understand.
Sure.
They made him just more of a man, and Thor again. They made him mortal for most of the movie until the end where he got to be Thor and do his stuff. And they parse that out. They give you bits, and then all of a sudden it's like a raccoon in a tree. Sure, why not?
Yeah, right.
It makes sense at this point.
Yeah.
But
I think that breeds a little bit of familiarity. It's like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah.
There's a reason why they saved Guardians of the Galaxy for a later movie. Like Iron Man, the first Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk movie both came out the same summer. And the Hulk movie didn't do as well as the Iron Man movie. They had put that Hulk movie out after the Avengers, when everybody was primed to see more Hulk. It would have done gangbusters.
Sure.
But the audiences weren't ready. It had a bit of an audience because it kind of played off the old TV show in a very subtle way, but it wasn't quite its time, even though it did some incredibly important things for superhero movies.
Like what?
So if you notice in Iron Man, you get to see Robert Downey Jr.'s face.
Yeah.
If they had made Hulk just 5 years previous, around the time that they made a Hulk movie, Ang Lee one, you would have had a situation where in order to see the actor's face, they would have had him changing back and forth from Banner into Hulk, because, you always show the actor. It's like Stallone in a Judge Dredd movie. You don't get to, you have to see Judge Dredd's face, even though they never showed his face in the comics. So the fact that they had an entire end of the movie where there was nothing but two characters battling it out, and the actors weren't involved. It was basically two CGI monsters pounding the crap out of each other. That was awesome. They wouldn't have done that before. That was them saying the characters were more important than the actors.
Oh, that's interesting.
But at the same time, they also cast it so perfectly that they got rid of their plan to recast, because there's a lot of people that would drop Iron Man if it wasn't Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, I think that was one of the smartest casting choices ever, and I think he fought to do it. But it's like he's a genius. He made that so much fun to watch, and it was like he really sold. I mean, I think that he probably welcomed in more of the audience than just the fact that it's CGI and cool and a fun ride. Like his sort of sharp cynicism and wit is just perfect for that character, but he really sold it.
Yes, and the fact that it was such a chance that they took on him.
Yeah.
Because if you think about where his career had been just a couple of years previous, drug arrests, he was, getting booted off TV shows.
Yeah.
That was, they saw something in him, and also the fact that he probably wasn't the highest paid actor in the world at that time, and that made them go with him. And
he was. I think he was making he had a couple years prior to that, he was making significant changes in his life where it was like, okay, it is risky, but he's not doing blow in hotel rooms in in Palm Springs, so maybe we can do that, maybe we can't, and like you said, they probably got him at a bargain.
Because if they had more money going into it, it probably would have been a Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah. Right.
I
can't.
No. I mean,
cannot.
I love me some of the films that Tom Cruise has made, but he's not Iron Man.
Yeah.
No, exactly. Exactly. They casted so perfect. It's like when they casted Chris Evans. Not many people knew him.
Yeah.
You know, if you'd watched Scott Pilgrim, you're like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's the guy from there or Push or these not necessarily A-tier movies, but he was Captain America. They made him Captain America.
Absolutely.
I think Robert Downey's life experience really kind of was what made him able to sell the Iron Man character. His what's the name of the man in the suit? What's his name?
Tony Stark.
Thank you. Just because he is able to convey some of that fragility and that kind of like he's kind of the self introspection / criticism that a good addict has. He's able to some of that humanity really comes through, and in a way that I don't think Tom Cruise could have pulled off.
Well, like we hear around certain circles of recovery, Tony Stark is an egomaniac with an inferiority complex.
Yes,
and Tony and Robert Downey Jr. gets it.
Yeah, and that's what I like. I really think that's what makes him so lovable in that suit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like that just
brought the vulnerability.
Through. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. He's like, okay, this is probably going to end badly. Here we go. Let's do this. I love it.
I gotta know though. I want to get back to because I think we've probably pulled you off on a tangent. Do you think you said the origins of the MCU pieced it out like a good drug dealer, but are we now just picking pills off the ground of a gnarly festival and is it just completely
ground scores?
Yeah, we just ground scoring with we just sucking down nitrous balloons in the parking lot, and like where are we at now? I mean, we started with a mind exploration, but because that's the thing, like when I watched the most recent Doctor Strange, I was like, oh boy, that's a lot to take in. And I've heard the same thing, and I try to not listen to critique, but I've heard the same thing about the new Thor. Some people say it's a lot of fun. Some people say it's complete chaos and ridiculousness. Like, are they jumping the shark?
They might be. I thought about this a lot. I saw Thor and I liked it, but I didn't love it. And it's they always talk about superhero fatigue, like superhero movie fatigue. And I think that Marvel is reaching a tipping point where the newness of it has kind of worn off, but they're also starting to really go into the weeds with concepts and things that it's going to start alienating people. The multiverse, that's cool if you're versed in it, but if it's a new concept and it's a concept that you don't understand or you don't quite get, it's just it might be just that bridge too far for Marvel. They've parsed it out, they got everybody on board, and instead of kind of coasting with that for a while, they just immediately hit the ground and start running towards the next huge movie or the next huge crossover, the next end game,
the next huge marketing bonanza.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to imagine some people they're going to start drifting away from it, and it's actually kind of natural.
Yeah. I think you know what, back to the start of our conversation about your comic book journey, I think that they should this is me, this is what I would do if I was Marvel's executive person. I would just bombard the situation with gritty X-Men, revamp the X-Men, bring all that in and make it more like that Logan movie, and just have this dark, gritty, like do a total Dark Knight, but with the X-Men, or with like an old and decrepit Spider-Man or so. I don't know. It's just like get dark, get horrible, like get really nitty gritty. Peter Parker's hooked on smack or something. Like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah, but he wouldn't do that.
I mean, why not? Why wouldn't he?
I don't know. Because that's not Peter Parker.
I know. Well, I just want to see it get gnarly.
It's an interesting concept because you're saying this is the characters and this is the movie I want to see, and that's totally valid. They can get a lot of mileage out of that. Now X-Men are coming in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Those rights are back when they bought 20th Century Fox, when they bought all that stuff. That X-Men and Fantastic Four are back, obviously, in their portfolio. Now I'm kind of the opposite. I want to see the X-Men being superheroes again. To kind of take it back to like the 70s and 80s version of the comics, where they were just they're in their yellow spandex and saving the world kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's got to be a happy medium between the two.
Yeah.
And Marvel is they're not going to come out with the first X-Men movie being an experimental movie.
Yeah.
It's going to be a full-on
branding
superhero. Yeah, it's going to be what everybody wants. It's going to what they it's going to be the story they want to tell, that they think is the best story to tell. Because the first X-Men movie back in the day was pretty much coming off the success of The Matrix, and why you've got powers, but everything's kind of low key and everybody's in black leather.
Yeah,
because they were going with what worked. They weren't going to, it was. I hate to say it, but a lot of people are afraid of superheroes being superheroes. That's why Captain America is so refreshing, because it's like he's a hero because it's the right thing to do. He doesn't have to have some sort of major damage that makes him who he is. For some characters it's appropriate, like Iron Man. There's a lot of damage that makes him who he is, and that resonates with some people. And then doing the right thing, because the right thing to do resonates with other people. And just that's the beauty of it, is that they do have this breadth of concepts, of themes, and things to explore. Nobody expected Loki to be one of the breakout characters of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
He's so great.
It's exactly, the way Tom Hiddleston played it and the way that they evolved this character, it made sense, and that does get reflected in the comics on some level.
Yeah.
There's the whole thing where let's make the comic look more like the movie version kind of thing.
How much do you think the style of the time affects the movies, and or to flip that around, do you think that the movies are big enough to affect the style of the time? Right? Like, for example, not to go back to the Grateful Dead again, but I'm going to, like, even they weren't immune to disco.
Yeah.
In the late 70s, they played some disco music the way they would play disco music,
Oh yeah. We're in an 80s revival right now with like Stranger Things and stuff like that, where people are using a lot of that 80s Escape from New York kind of retro wave music and things. And you're seeing a lot of that in, or this isn't a spoiler, but there's a lot of Guns N' Roses music in it. From Appetite for Destruction.
Yeah.
The best rock album of all time.
Whoa. Hot take from the top rope, Brian. Wow. You just added an hour to our conversation with that one, man.
This just became a two-parter.
Especially with Steve.
I love Appetite.
Yeah,
when I came out in high school, it's one of the best rock albums ever made. It's right up there, man. Top 5 for sure.
It is one of those. They kind of lost the plot after that, but at least they came out with one album that is from beginning to end. If you're not burned out on any of the songs, is a solid album.
100%.
Yeah,
they were. They hit that nail on the proverbial head.
Yeah. I was thinking. I was just before. I want to go back to something about the X-Men and all that. I realized like that this is me musing and wanting a certain thing, because Kirsten, my wife, loves the X-Men. I also I think that there is a timely opportunity with the X-Men to do what they didn't do with the movies before, because there was always like this, there's a band of people at the school that are mutants and they're scared of it and they're not proud of it, and they have to have Professor X sort of coach them into being fully realized and like proud of who they are and that they're different, and that's good. I feel like the kids these days are really into like this idea of like there's, you know, that what separates you, what makes you special and different is actually your superpower. I think that they have this great opportunity to really welcome in a young generation with the X-Men being like, whatever makes you strange and weird or not like the norm, that's to be celebrated. And we don't need to spend 3 movies trying to coach people out of that trauma. They can just come out guns blaring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, that metaphor has really taken the forefront in X-Men.
Yeah.
And once you distill it down to that, it's the thing that makes you special is the things that other people don't understand, and they're going to try to hurt you because of it. You know, it can be a theme. You know, when you're seeing a big summer action movie, it depends on how they're going to approach it, because the general audience, they not necessarily want to get bogged down with it,
right?
But as a through line that kind of gives you something more to grab onto. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you have characters like Wolverine, that he's an example of somebody like that, but didn't have a Professor X. He had to come into self-actualization on his own.
Right.
And so his attitude is very different from Scott Summers, who, you know, had the school.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the conflict can come from, because you do have different ways to self-actualize. Do we need a mentor to help us get us there, or are they basically molding us in their way? You know, how do we grow and change if we have somebody who's telling us how to grow and change versus, yes, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why these beams are shooting out of my eyes and it hurts some people. And, you know, do I want it to go away, or do I want to accept it and learn how to utilize it for the greater good, kind of thing?
It points out too that these mythic stories in especially in superhero lore are yeah, I mean they're moral, they're like, yeah, they're moral stories. They're the Greek tragedy, or Greeks, you know, like as a theater professor, I think of, you know, the ancient Greek civilizations going to the theater to see their heroes fail, succeed, learn all those lessons. And it's like, well, we still do that. We have a lot more of it. It's not just one day a month or whatever, one day a year where we watch 8 hours of shit, but it's like, you know, that's just a reminder that there's a lot of potential with these. I mean, I feel that with Star Wars too, and that's a whole other podcast, but I feel like there are things they're doing for the almighty dollar, and then there's certain things that I think they're doing that that could be really fascinating and powerful and wonderful. But
it's almost like it would be worth their while to basically start like a little sub studio where they do the stuff like Logan, and, you know, the indie film version of the big guns.
Totally. I would go bananas for, I mean, there's a new series coming out on Disney Plus called Andor about that character who kind of started the rebellion. I feel like that's an opportunity. It's still going to be Disney-fied, but I feel like a small little subset studio that's going to just talk. Like, I would watch a 3-movie series about a Sith binary, like 2 Sith lords wreaking havoc. You know, like that would be amazing. Like I've come into reading all the Star Wars novels, and that's kind of my imaginative world. Oh, it's so good, man. Was that judgment
from me?
No,
from Brian.
no judgment. Different paths.
Yes.
I started with Star Wars. You know, I saw Star Wars when I was 3 because my cousins took me to see it.
Right.
And it imprinted on me.
Right.
So I was the one that in the 80s, I was playing the Star Wars role-playing game and getting all that lore. And then when the novels, you know, when the Heir to the Empire trilogy came out, I devoured it. Yes. And then as I went along, got to the point where you get to those certain novels where you're like, oh no, oh, they're just letting anybody write this stuff, and it's just garbage. And I tried to, when Force Awakens came out, it kind of gave some new novels out there and everything, and I gave it a shot, but it just was not my jam.
Yeah,
it was not my jam.
I've read enough to know a couple of the authors I stay away from. You know, the one in particular who is a male author, and he writes female characters really misogynistically, and I'm like, ugh, I'm like cringing reading. I'm like, I like the story, but I feel dirty. This is not good. This is bad. I can't do this.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the you like Star Wars, you want Star Wars content.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I guess bringing it back to comics, it's not necessarily the creator or the character. For me, it's not necessarily that. It's the combination of the two. It's the right creator doing the right character and creating something that's more than the sum of the parts. And so it's like, I'll read something for a while. When the creative team changes, I'll give them a shot. And if I don't care for them, I'll drop it. There are certain runs that are more important to me than necessarily the characters or the creators.
Yeah.
So
I think I identify with what you said earlier about the MCU movies. It's like grain of salt. I'll see it, like I'm not going to complain about a Star Wars movie in the theater, but I also can practice some discernment, and I'm not just like anything that they make is good. So yeah, that's cool.
Well, gents, we're starting to bump up against our time window.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a bummer because this has been really awesome.
I mean, we opened up a lot of doors here. Yeah. Brian, thank you so much for your time. I guess one thing I like to do at the end of our pod, you mentioned Guns N' Roses. One thing I like to do with guests, and we haven't done this for a minute. Maybe I'm going to cater this to you. First off, what are you reading right now? Maybe in the comic book world that would be like if a young kid or somebody who wants to start reading comics is listening.
That's our audience is young kids.
Young kid. Yeah, they're really loving our Grateful Dead discussions. But somebody who wants to read like, what would you suggest? Like, if you are that comic book store owner and somebody like Steve walks in and is like, hey, I want to read this thing. What would you throw out there? And then also, aside from Appetite for Destruction, what's some of your favorite music?
Well, in the comic thing at my shop, I actually suggested, I was like, you guys should just take like a little bookshelf, put it right here, and just have it as the start here bookshelf. We're living in our own personal golden age of reprints these days, and my particular jam has been the Marvel Epic Collection, because they go back to the beginning. You can go and you can get basically issue 1 of Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and you can read, it's 20 issues of Spider-Man in a row of the original, series. You can do that with Hulk. You can do that with Captain America. Well, the Silver Age, at least. Omnibuses. My jam has when Conan went back to Marvel, started reprinting all that stuff, and Conan's kind of a huge character for me, so I've been getting those. And now that the license is left, I'm kind of mourning the end of those reprints. But for getting started, they've made it a bit easier. You can go back, cool. you can get, but the Marvel Epic collections are pretty much the gold standard right now for somebody who wants a reasonably affordable dive into eras of comics that go back to the beginning of the official Marvel universe.
Cool.
Thank you. That's awesome.
And what are you listening to? What's your favorite?
Man, I listen to so much different stuff.
Cool.
It's my ultimate favorite band of all time is Tool. That's without question.
Nice.
Have
you seen them on this recent tour? The recent couple of tours? I haven't seen them on any.
I haven't seen them since 2010, but I have seen them about 5 or 6 times. I've seen A Perfect Circle a few times. I saw Perfect Circle twice before their first album came out, so nobody knew who they were.
Wow.
And I saw them open at Coachella.
Wow.
And they did a song that is going to haunt me forever because they're never going to play it again, and you can't find a copy of it anywhere. But they did a medley that was Cure Love Song and Ozzy's Diary of a Madman.
What?
It was mystical.
Joel's head just exploded.
It was an absolute journey of a song, and it was wonderful.
One of the best shows I went to on a lark was I went to go see A Perfect Circle because I've always been a Tool fan, and I saw A Perfect Circle when they played that Red Rocks show that they recorded. I saw them at that, but then I was like, well, they're in Omaha, I'll go. And I bought a single ticket, like second row. And I was just, I mean, it was one of the most amazing experiences ever. That is cool though, that they covered The Cure and what'd you say?
Ozzy.
Diary of a Madman. They turned it into they merged the 2 songs into one. And it was, yeah.
Joel's gonna need to go take a nap after this.
I know.
Just because of that.
Wow. Yeah, that first Coachella kind of hit a lot of big notes for me because that was the first time that Rage got back together.
Yep.
And the fact that it was Rage and then Tool playing.
Yep.
And Maynard came out and did Know Your Enemy with them.
Oh wow.
And it was just, it was sublime.
Yeah.
It was very cool. That was a magical moment for me. But yeah, I've seen them a bunch of times. But I'm all over the place, man. When it comes to music, there's so much out there, and there's so much stuff that's cool.
One thing I always ask my students in like an icebreaker is, what's the guilty pleasure? What's the thing that you roll your windows up when you're listening to it too loud at a stoplight? What's the thing that you don't want people to know? Give us your guilty pleasure, buddy.
I have no shame, so I don't really believe in guilty pleasures. But there was the time that I was sitting at a stoplight listening to ABBA, listening to "Gimme, Gimme, Gimme" and singing along with it, and like there was like a car full of girls next to me, and I'm just like, "Gimme, gimme, gimme a Man After Midnight," just going full bore. It's I don't have any shame. Music is music, and everybody's got their styles. There's I love DMX. I felt bad when he passed. I'll jam with the classical. I love Vince Guaraldi, so I'll sit there and listen to the Peanuts soundtracks.
Love it.
That is just like right to the heart for me. Like every time, just right to the heart. It's like, yeah.
It is. There's so much out there. Why sit there and poo-poo anything? Just because modern day country, not really a fan.
Yeah,
pop country, but old country. The Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash, Kenny Rogers, Dolly Parton. I'm totally down with that stuff. It's always, and if you don't let other people listen to their music around you, then how will you ever discover something new?
Right.
Ooh, that's a gem right there, man. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Me and past guest David Gracie went to the record store yesterday and hung out for a little while. And it had the moment, like, just stand there talking to him. Like, it was so nice to do that because it's like we cross-pollinated.
Yeah.
Nice. Like we each bought a record or two that the other person said, you should buy this. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's good.
That's great.
Well, Brian, man, thank you so much for doing this. It's really nice to see you, and we should talk more often.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm going over to my parents' house for dinner tonight, and I'll tell them that I got to hang out with you this morning.
Yeah, that'd be great. Tell them I said hi and give them my regards for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. It's really cool to meet you, and it felt like we were all just sitting around having a beverage and talking about stuff. So that was awesome, man. I really appreciate your time and if things get crazy in the MCU or comic book world, we'll have you back on. You're welcome back anytime.
For real. All right. Thanks.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Please, would you like to be down beneath the reaches of sound. You could hear me, Captain Fantasy. Fantasy,
Don't forget, toot your hooter.